This paper shows that COVID rapid antigen tests are pretty good indicators if you're actively infectious with COVID, meaning that if you test positive on a rapid test, that means you're actively infectious and can spread it to others. It is, however, very important to note that you are infectious for a period of time before you first test positive on a rapid antigen test. So, as a reminder, with earlier COVID variants, you would test positive about the first 24 hours after symptoms appeared. But from more recent data, we know that it's taking about 4 to 5 days to test positive on a rapid antigen test after symptoms appear. And this is just because the viral expression, the peak viral load, is taking longer to occur. But while you're still in that early symptomatic phase, or even asymptomatic phase, you're still going to be infectious. You're just going to be even more infectious when you test positive on that rapid test. Furthermore, we don't have a very well-defined window for when you stop being infectious. Because just like at the beginning window, when you're not testing positive in the rapid test, you're still infectious. At the end of the window, when you first test negative with that rapid antigen test, you can still be infectious for a period of time. And we don't really know how long that period of time is. But as we've seen in the persistent infection and the chronic infection studies where you sort of have that rebound infection, if you are going to have that rebound, it's going to happen within the first 7 days after that first negative test. So for me, that's my general rule of thumb is 3 negative tests over the course of 7 days, and then you're likely good to go, meaning you're not going to be very likely to be infectious to other people after that point. But back to the matter at hand, let's dive in. So to gauge COVID infectivity, we've developed viral cultures, live viral cultures, which is an indicator if the COVID virus is actually replicating. So if you take a culture from an infected individual over various time points, if the COVID is still actively replicating in culture, then the person is considered still infectious. Additionally, they measured the sample viral loads using reverse transcriptase quantitative PCR. And what they found was that antigen tests were predictive of viral culture positivity, and that culture positivity was highly correlated with the sample viral load, where the sensitivity of antigen tests was high at high viral loads, and these high viral loads are likely associated with significant infectivity. Therefore, their data supports the use of rapid antigen testing in ruling out infectivity at the time of sampling. So for a little background, antigen and PCR tests are different in that they detect different components of the COVID virus, where the PCR tests are looking at the RNA and the antigen tests are looking at the nucleocapsid protein most often, sometimes the spike protein. And for a while, it was believed that neither of these tests reflected the presence of infectious virus. However, what we do know is that as the viral load increases, so too does the infectiousness risk. So when looking at this plot, we know that PCR is a very sensitive test. It can pick up very low levels of COVID, meaning that an over-the-counter PCR test is going to be a very good selection for telling if you're infected very early on, in addition to if you're still carrying latent parts of the virus. And that could be useful in telling if you've had a recent COVID infection, like if you're asymptomatic, or if you were sick and you never got tested, but then you got a PCR test later on and you still were carrying a little bit of COVID in you. You very likely wouldn't be infectious at that point, but it would tell you that yes, you did have a recent COVID infection. On the other hand, our lateral flow assays, our rapid antigen testing, are not very sensitive, meaning that it takes a higher viral load to first detect that first positive. And because of this, if you're testing positive on a rapid antigen test, it's a very good indicator that yes, you are actively infectious, that you are actively shedding virus and can infect other people. So then, how did they test this infectiousness? Well, they took nasopharyngeal samples from individuals between March 2021 to June 2021, sampling both symptomatic and asymptomatic individuals, where depending on the test methodology, they had between 176 to 206 samples. And to test for COVID viral culture, they performed an incubation protocol with a negative control sample, meaning that any detectable virus in the sample should only represent viable replicating virus. Or in other words, the only COVID that's detected is COVID that can infect neighboring cells. Or, in other words, it could also infect other people. For the lateral flow assays, the rapid antigen test, they found that viral loads greater than approximately 10 to the 7 genome copies per milliliter was consistently detected, which is relevant because a viral load cutoff of 10 to the 5 genome copies per milliliter was all that was required for predicting a positive viral culture. So between 10 to the 4 and 10 to the 5 is when you start becoming infectious, and then 10 to the 7 is when the lateral flow assays will pick it up, which fits perfectly in line with what we know, that you're going to be infectious for a period of time before you test positive. And then when you test positive on the rapid antigen test, you're certainly going to be infectious. But then again, after it gets below that 10 to the 7, you're still going to be infectious for a short period of time. You're just going to be testing negative. So you also have to compensate for that on the tail end of your infection as well. So again, their study showed that antigen testing predicted the ability to culture live COVID virus and therefore the ability to predict infectivity, meaning that if you're positive on a rapid test, you're definitely going to be infectious to other people. where their viral load cutoff for infectivity was around 10 to the 5 genome copies per milliliter. So the authors believe that antigen tests are very useful in determining whether symptomatic individuals are infectious and need to self-isolate or can return to work or other activities. But again, you need to incorporate serial testing to increase the negative predictive value to make sure you're actually negative and it's not just slightly going below the limit of detection and then raising back up and oscillating. So not only do you have to keep that in mind, but you also have to keep in mind the viral kinetics. So viral kinetics would be like how it shifted from symptom onset to first positive test from 24 hours to about between 3 to 5 days, more heavily weighted to 4 to 5 days. That's now when you're most likely to test positive on a rapid test. However, again, even if you're not yet testing positive on that rapid test, you are still likely infectious. And that's sort of the situation we're in right now. And this is how rapid tests can be very useful to determine if you're actively infectious to others or not.